The bad news, Justin Fields is not likely to be the long-term solution at quarterback for the Jets. The good news, he doesn't have to be to make his signing a success. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, June 12th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. Usually we do our mailbags on Wednesday each week, but because of minicamp, Jets finishing off their offseason program, we're pushing it to Thursday this week. Let's begin. Our first question is about who else but the quarterback, Justin Fields. It goes, John, I keep hearing you dismiss the idea that Justin Fields could be the long-term quarterback for the Jets. I ask, why not? As you frequently say, his best games have been very good. He obviously has a lot of potential. He was a high first-round pick, so the talent is there. Why can't Justin Fields be the long-term solution for the Jets at the quarterback position? Well, there's a difference between can be and is likely to be. Can Justin Fields be the long-term quarterback for the Jets? Well, of course. But I think if you look at Justin Fields' career trajectory, what you have to do is compare it to other players with a similar trajectory, or at least the trajectory the Jets want. And, whenever a young player doesn't produce, there are always a lot of excuses made. They say, well, he's only a couple years into his career. There's still time to turn it around. Look at this guy who had a big improvement over the course of his career. But the reality is most players don't have massive improvements. For Justin Fields to be the long-term solution at quarterback for the New York Jets, and when by long-term, I mean be here for the next 10 years, be a legitimate franchise quarterback, be like a top 10 type quarterback, for that to happen, he'd have to have an enormous improvement. Whereas for him to be like a medium-term quarterback, a guy who's just kind of hold the fort, he still needs to improve. I think that it's plausible he could improve to the point where he could be, a bridge type quarterback, the guy that could get the Jets to their next franchise guy. And I think that's critical. I don't think the Jets signed Justin Fields with the idea he's going to be here 10 years. I think the Jets signed Justin Fields with the idea that this is a guy with tools we think we can develop. This is a guy we think we can get more out of than maybe the Chicago Bears did. And a lot of that will ultimately fall to coaching. But one of the problems the Jets have had over the last 15 years, or perhaps even longer, is they've never been in a position where they've been able to sit a rookie quarterback. They weren't able to do it with Mark Sanchez. They weren't able to do it with Sam Darnold. They weren't able to do it with Zach Wilson. They weren't able to do it with Geno Smith. Little bit of a caveat there because Sanchez was on the team then and got injured, but Sanchez really wasn't a guy who was going to be able to hold the fort for the Jets anyway. Geno Smith would have had to see the field his rookie year, even if Sanchez had not gotten injured in a preseason game. And there are some guys who are able to step in day one and play effectively. Of course, that's the case, but it's not true of everyone. And I think that you always want to have the option of sitting the rookie quarterback in year one. And if the rookie quarterback goes out there and plays fantastic and looks like he's ready to go, then you can put him in. But a lot of rookies aren't ready. And I think sometimes NFL teams, in part because of wishful thinking, overestimate how ready a rookie quarterback is to step in. Because the majority of rookie quarterbacks, even guys that turn out to be pretty good starters, end up really being in over their head in year one. I mean, they're just trying to stay afloat. They're just trying to tread water. So that's where the value of somebody like Justin Fields comes in. Yeah, like Justin Fields could end up improving to the point where he's the long-term quarterback. Anything can happen. And there have been guys with unexpected career trajectories. But if we're being honest, players who start their career with, like Justin Fields, usually they don't even turn into bridge quarterbacks. But I think for the Jets, there's a chance. Like, it's at least plausible to see him have like a Ryan Tannehill or a Sam Darnold type career trajectory where he gets better, he gets into the right situation, maybe he's a little bit more comfortable reading coverages. He has a team with that can put him in good situations where they're not asking him to do things he's bad at. And he can at least be a functional quarterback, a guy you can win games with, a guy who, at least you can live with as a starter going forward. I think that asking Justin Fields to become, a long-term starter is a much, much bigger ask. And it's plausible. Again, there's a difference between can happen and is likely to happen. I think it's much more likely, and really what the Jets need is for Fields to become just a bridge to the future. Give you the luxury of when you draft a quarterback, allow him to sit for a year and develop. And really what that comes down to is whether you play well enough to stay on the field. Because whenever you draft a quarterback, if you don't have like a plausible placeholder, the second that guy struggles, everyone puts pressure on you to put the rookie in. And that's what you want to avoid. Sometimes guys in this situation go out and thrive. When the Detroit Lions created for Jared Goff and put him under center, I think everybody expected Detroit to draft a quarterback within a year or two. And Goff has played well enough where, he's kind of turned himself into like at least a medium, maybe long-term starter in Detroit. So I think that's like what you're looking for if you want Fields to be the long-term starter. But it's also worth noting, I think Goff had more success early in his career than Fields. So it might be, a bit much to ask. Our next question comes from Jerry. Obviously, there's a lot of talk for extensions for Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson. I have a question on how it works. Does the extension replace the next 2 years of their current contract? So it'd be year 4 and year 5, or does it get tacked on to the back of those 2 years? So the question is essentially, when Sauce and Garrett sign a new contract, does it impact the years they're currently under contract? Because they're currently under contract for the next 2 years. So do those 2 years get altered, or do we just tack on a new deal at the end of these deals? Those 2 years stay the same, and then we just tack a new contract on after 2 years. And the answer is, it's up to the player and the team. You can like alter a deal any way you want to. But generally speaking, when players are extended after their third years, the fourth year usually doesn't get touched that much because the fourth year is the last real year of the rookie contract. It's the last year where the player's cheap. So it's not really in the team's interest to touch the fourth year. Sometimes you see like a little bit of an impact. So I think when the Texans extended Derek Stingley a little while back, they boosted his salary by about $300,000 for this year. So the teams usually don't want to do it because like the fourth year is the last year the player's cheap on the rookie contract. And the player's usually willing to accommodate that because these contracts come with big signing bonuses. And the signing bonus is something you get right up front. It's signing bonus, the schedule is something you negotiate when you get the schedule of when you get paid. But the signing bonus is usually the team cuts you a big check. So you get like a $50 million signing bonus. The team's giving you a $50 million check. You're usually not going to demand that they like increase your salary for that season because they're giving you a check right now. So even if I have to play under the old salary, I'm willing to live with that. So generally it doesn't touch the fourth year. The fifth year it could touch. The fifth year is the fifth year option. And that's something that the teams have a team option for a fifth year on their contracts with players they draft in the first round. Both Sauce and Garrett have had their team options picked up for their fifth year. And those are usually pretty expensive years. So the team might like negotiate a better structure where the player's cap hit goes down in the fifth year. So I think most likely what would happen here, like in reality, like anything can happen as long as the player and the team agree to it. But for all intents and purposes, I mean, really, probably the fourth year would not be touched. The fifth year, the Jets may try and negotiate a lower cap hit because Sauce, I think, cap hit in 2026 is set to be like $20 million. And Garrett's, I think, is around $16 million. So, the Jets may want to reduce those hits for a year from now. So they get them a little bit cheaper and give themselves some more maneuverability next offseason. But obviously, these are going to be big contracts. These are both going to be contracts that will average around $30 million a year. And I think what would probably happen, what usually happens is you really backload these deals in terms of the cap hit. You push the big cap hits to future years. And part of that strategy, because you're expecting the cap to be higher in those future years. So it means that paying a player a lot of money is not going to be as detrimental to your cap. So to answer the question, like in theory, anything could happen, but in reality, that's probably how it would go. Is you probably would not touch the fourth year. The fifth year, you may negotiate it to lower the cap hit, and then beyond that, when the cap's going to be higher, that's when you put the big money deals. That's usually the way teams do it. So that's where I would expect the Jets would go with these Sauce and Garrett contracts. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about the center position because it sounds like there could be a position battle there. And there's one guy who should clearly win the job. Should the Jets, no matter what happens though, should the Jets keep their depth or should they maybe look to make a trade? I have some strong thoughts on that. I'll give them to you as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by the Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the I don't know excuse from your family's routine? Could assigning everyone their own color finally solve the who does what confusion in your house? How often do plans get missed because they're buried in a digital calendar or not written down at all? Hey, the Jets could probably use Skylight Calendar to figure out their meeting schedules once we get to the season. Well, right now, Skylight Calendar is offering our listeners $30 off for their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Our next question comes from Jimmy, who writes, John, a lot has been discussed about the center competition between Joe Tippmann and Josh Myers. Myers has a lot of experience, and it would not be surprising if he won the starting spot. If that happens, having Tippmann as a backup gives us a lot of depth, but that's a lot of talent to have on the sidelines. Is he a possible trade chip, or could he be used as an extra lineman in certain packages? Well, usually if you go six offensive linemen, the sixth guy is a tackle because he's going to line up at the end of the line of scrimmage. He's going to essentially line up as a tight end. So I don't think that Tippmann would be used in that role. I think it would probably be Chukwuma Okorafor. Usually it's like your number 3 tackle if you want to go with 6 offensive linemen because he's used to playing at the line of scrimmage, and that's where he's going to line up. My hope is that Tippmann wins the job. As I've discussed in earlier episodes of this show, like I have no problem with the competition. I don't think teams force their players to compete enough. I think that when a guy becomes entrenched as a starter, he's essentially just gifted that job. And I don't think there's anything wrong in the NFL with we're constantly forcing guys to earn their spots. I don't think there's anything wrong with making guys a little uncomfortable and forcing them to compete, even if they are an established starter. But that said, I mean, Joe Tippmann's a better player than Josh Myers. I think that, or at least he has been to this point in his career. And if Joe Tippmann gets beaten out by Josh Myers, something's gone wrong. Either Tippmann's shown signs he's going to regress, or the coaching staff has made a mistake. But across the league, there is a lack of offensive line depth. And offensive line is not a place where guys typically stay healthy. So I would be very, very hesitant to make a trade because especially on the interior line, I mean, think about it, you have guys rolling around. I mean, how many times does somebody roll an ankle? How many times does somebody suffer a serious injury because a guy, rolls up on him? I would not mess I would not mess with offensive line depth, especially early in the season. And here's the thing, I think we dismiss trade. I think we dismiss the idea of depth sometimes. It's like whenever a team has depth, people say, well, we got to get rid of it. Well, you don't have to offload depth. You can have depth. You can have, and then if an injury happens, you're actually not in a terrible spot. And the Jets are one of the rare teams in the NFL right now that could probably survive an injury to an interior offensive lineman because of that Josh Myers signing. And here's the other aspect of this is, even if you were going to make a trade, I think you wait till the season, because if some team unexpectedly suffers an injury to their interior offensive line, they're probably going to offer more in the season than they would right now. So I think patience is a virtue. So let's say the Jets get off to a bad start this year. It's obvious they're not going anywhere. That's the point where maybe you look to trade your excess depth, but you wait for a team that's desperate, because right now nobody's really desperate to upgrade that spot. So, and maybe multiple teams suffer an injury and you're able to create a little bit of a bidding war. So, I don't think I'd mess around with what the Jets have right now. And my hope is that Tippmann wins the job. Again, I like that they're making him compete, but something's gone wrong if Tippmann doesn't win this job, because Tippmann's been a better player to this point in their respective careers. And, keep the depth, because injuries do happen on the offensive line. I mean, Elijah Vera-Tucker, he's an interior offensive lineman. He's had 2 serious injuries at this point in his career. I think especially, in that situation, you want to make sure that you have good players backing up your starters. Next question, John. Remember a couple of years ago, Quincy Williams emerged out of nowhere to earn an all-pro spot. Who do you think on the Jets is capable of doing the same this year? Of course, 2 years ago, Quincy Williams just came out of nowhere. The Jets re-signed him to a pretty reasonable contract. He had been fine to that point. He'd been an okay starter. but he's been a pretty inconsistent guy. He wasn't a guy that would destroy you, but he wasn't a guy that was dominating. And then in 2023, he shows up, it looks like a different player and becomes a first-team All-Pro. Always a difficult thing to predict. I think that the guy, and this, I don't know if this answers the question perfectly, because this is already a guy who's established himself as a good player, but I wouldn't be shocked if we're going a little bit off the radar. Who's likely to become a first-team All-Pro? Maybe Michael Carter II, because Michael Carter II's already established himself as one of the better slot corners in the league, and of course he had a down season last year in 2024. A lot of that had to do with injuries, but there's a reason the Jets gave him a very lucrative contract. I mean, Michael Carter II is paid among the top slot corners in the league, and I think people know how good he is. So he may not be exactly like Quincy Williams, because Quincy Williams is just kind of an okay starter. Michael Carter II is an above average starter. But the other aspect of this is that the Associated Press recently changed the way it votes for all pros, and they've kind of changed the position designations to make them reflect the modern NFL more. For years, the AP was using like the old positions where then they didn't really have a spot for a slot corner. Slot, you have to remember, like 20 years ago, a slot corner was really a part-time player. He's pretty much a guy who played in sub packages. Whereas now your slot corner is a starter. We're in an era in the NFL where teams start 3 receivers, which means you need a third corner, and the third corner is the slot corner. Now with that, there is now a spot in the All-Pro team voting for a slot corner. I wouldn't be shocked if Michael Carter II competed for that spot this year. Another guy I feel less conviction on would be Will McDonald, from the standpoint that he's kind of bulked up this offseason. We've already seen McDonald's can get to the quarterback. He had a very good pressure rate last year. He had double-digit sacks. The weird thing about McDonald is, like, early in the season, he had like a lot of sacks that came in ways that aren't sustainable, because he just had a bunch of plays where he wasn't blocked and he just got to the quarterback. And of course, the famous play with Will Levis, where Will Levis rolled the ball on the ground, and McDonald got credit for a sack on that. It was one of those ridiculous plays you'll ever see. The Jets' Week 2 win over the Tennessee Titans. Will Levis just gave the ball to the Jets, and McDonald got credit for a strip sack on that. But he did generate pressure at a good rate, which suggests that like it is sustainable. Typically, if you see a guy generate pressure at a high rate, that means he's going to get a lot of sacks. And if you see a guy generate pressure at a low rate, he's not. You see guys, so sometimes you'll see a guy have like a 10 sack season and a low pressure rate. That guy's going to regress. Or you see a guy have a really high pressure rate and only have like 2 sacks. He's probably going to generate more the next season. And it's not like some advanced statistical like formula that like tells us this, although like the numbers do suggest it. It's just common sense. Guys who are around the quarterback more often get more sacks than guys who aren't around the quarterback more often. So, Will McDonald had a breakout season last year, but I think the thing that could really help him out is the fact that he's added about 15 pounds, according to Aaron Glenn. And the reason that's significant is McDonald was a problem in the run game last year. McDonald, was a guy who probably played more than he should have last year, and that's just because outside of Quinn and Williams, the Jets had no other player on the defensive line who could generate consistent pressures. But McDonald was really light last year. I mean, Robert Saleh said he was still around his rookie weight, which was in the range of like 235, which made him one of the smallest defensive linemen in the league, and it showed. I mean, he got pushed around in the run game. Again, the Jets had to put him out there because they didn't really have anybody else who could get to the quarterback, but he got exposed in the run game. But adding that bulk should make him sturdier in the run game. That should, could potentially make him a 3-down player. Is it going to be good enough to be an all-pro? I don't know, but a guy who already has double-digit sacks, if he learns how to play the run and is able to stay on the field for a longer time without being a liability, perhaps it's a possibility. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the Jets secondary. Jets secondary has changed, and their approach to playing defense in the secondary may have to change as a result. We'll talk about that as we continue here on this Thursday mailbag edition of Locked On. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Of course, the NBA Finals are here, and every game delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game. Before tip-off and live, with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Of course, not many people are excited about the NBA Finals in the New York area, especially you Knicks fans, because Knicks came close. And sorry, I don't mean to rub salt in the wounds. But if you want to stay involved and you want to stay in on the action during the NBA Finals, FanDuel is the right place to go. Or maybe turn the page on the NBA, you're focused on baseball, or the NFL season, which is coming up. Jets have an over-under of 5.5 wins on FanDuel. So if you think they're going to exceed that, Again, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. Are you new to FanDuel? Well, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. Here on this Thursday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, where do you see the secondary as a whole going into the season? We have some interchangeable parts, but where do you see are the weaknesses that may need to be disguised by scheme with this personnel group? To me, like, there's one big change, and it comes with the number 2 corner slot. DJ Reed out, Brandon Stevens in. And I don't think there's any way to see that as anything other than a downgrade. DJ Reed was an excellent number 2 corner. I think the last 3 years, DJ Reed would have been the number 1 corner on a lot of teams, and he just wasn't, because the Jets had Sauce Gardner, who was such a one of the top 3 best corners in the league. But I think DJ Reed was a big loss. I would have liked to have seen the Jets try and keep DJ Reed, but it just felt like Reed was done with the Jets. He kind of, there were the reports that he was already talking before the season was over about how he couldn't wait to be out of New York, and Reed had kind of a rough 3 years in New York. He held up his end of the bargain really well. He was one of the Jets' best free agent signings. In fact, I can't think of another 21st century Jets free agent signing who was better value than DJ Reed. He played like a number 1 corner, and the Jets paid him like decent starter. The DJ Reed's kind of like the ideal of what you want in free agency. They got an ascending player, a guy who was on the upswing. They got him for a reasonable contract, and he outplayed the contract. I mean, I actually think, like, I've thought about this. I think you'd have to go back to 1998 to find someone who was better. That was the year the Jets signed 2 Hall of Fame players, Curtis Martin and Kevin Mawai. Those were both better than, obviously both of them were better than DJ Reed. But after that, I can't think of anybody who's been better than DJ Reed. And just bringing Brandon Stevens, who is a bit of a project. He's a guy who was very inconsistent in Baltimore. And the Jets clearly think that they can take his tools and turn him into a better player. And we'll see. He's got a lot of length. To this point in his career, he's been better in man coverage than zone coverage, and the Jets are moving to a more man-oriented scheme. So this is a test of the coaching staff, and it's a test of the front office, working with the coaching staff. Did the Jets find a gem? I don't know that we can bank on that. And that means I think that the Jets are going to have to scheme around this. And I think that I've talked about this on the show in recent episodes, that I think the Jets are going to have to have Sauce Gardner shadow the other team's best wide receiver more frequently. And shadowing means that, Sauce Gardner sees the number 1 receiver, and if he goes left, Sauce goes left with him. If the receiver goes right, Sauce goes right with him. To this point in his career, Sauce Gardner's been a guy who plays on the left side. DJ Reed played on the right side. And when you had a defense as good as the Jets, and when you had 2 corners as good as those two, it didn't really matter which receiver they took. You'd rather have Sauce on the other team's number 1 guy than DJ, but you live perfectly fine with DJ as your number facing the other team's top receiver. I don't know that that's true with Brandon Stevens. So, I think that's really the biggest change the Jets are going to have to make this year, because your number 2 corner is just of lower quality. Now, maybe the Jets did find gold in Brandon Stevens. Maybe the Jets did find a good player. And if they did, that's certainly a great thing, and maybe that changes the calculus. But I don't see how you can count on Brandon Stevens being as good as DJ Reed on day one. So that's really the issue. I mean, the other issue would be coverage at the safety position. Andre Sisco is going to be the deep guy. He'll be the the single high center fielder who's tasked with getting the interceptions. But Tony Adams, he'll play closer to the line of scrimmage. Malachi Moore, the rookie who I'm high on. I don't know that the Jets have a safety though who's going to be able to match up one-on-one against other tight ends, skilled receiving tight ends and skilled receiving running backs. But the caveat to that is there aren't a lot of teams that have those guys anyway, and there aren't a lot of teams that have dynamic tight ends or dynamic receiving running backs. So I'm less worried about that. On a week-to-week basis, most of the time, the toughest opponents you face in the passing game are wide receivers. And I think that's the other aspect of this is against teams that have a dynamic 1-2 punch, the Jets are going to be at more of a disadvantage this year. So I think schematically, another thing you'll need to see is you'll kind of have to go back to the Rex Ryan days. Sometimes what happened in the Rex Ryan days was he would stick Revis one-on-one against the other team's best receiver. And essentially what they do on the other side of the field was they kind of did like a combination of coverages where Revis was man-to-man against the other team's best receiver. And then on the other side of the field, they just stuck a ton of bodies. They played zone coverage, and they essentially just clogged the passing lanes because Revis was tasked with shutting down the other team's receiver one-on-one, which then everybody else could just go to clogging the passing lanes on the other side. So I think like that's another schematic thing you can do to help out Brandon Stevens. And it certainly worked well for the Jets back in the Revis day. I'm not saying Sauce Gardner's Revis, but he's close. He's an excellent corner. And I think if anything, like Sauce Gardner's talent has not been fully displayed because the Jets played a system under Robert Saleh where lots of zone coverage, not a lot of one-on-ones for your corner. So Sauce never really got a chance to shine in Robert Saleh's defense. And even with that, he was a multiple-time first-team All-Pro. Now in Aaron Glenn's defense, I think Sauce Gardner becomes the most important player. And that gives him an opportunity to like really expand what he's capable of providing and give the Jets a legitimate number one corner, a legitimate shutdown guy to take the other team's best receiver out of the game. And then, like a great player with Sauce Gardner, what he does is he makes life easier for everyone else. Because if he can take away the other team's best receiver, then the rest of the defense can focus on the secondary options who just aren't as talented. So that's kind of where I go with that. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. Just a programming note, we are like actually in our summer schedule right now, so I've been doing my best to continue producing daily episods. Tomorrow is Friday. I'm going to do my best to get a show up, but this might be our last show for the week. So keep updating the feed, and if you do subscribe to the show so that you'll get automatic updates when they post. So we'll chat again next time. We're going to try and get a show up tomorrow, but I'm not sure whether I'll be able to. If not, then we'll chat again next week.